InvestView's family of subsidiaries focus on delivering products that serve individuals around the world. InvestView companies are forging a path for individuals to take advantage of financial and technical innovations. For you, for your family, for your future. InvestView. Invest in you.
Hey, welcome back. Kicking off an hour 2 of a Money Monday edition of Liquid Lunch on Newsmax TV. I'm John Tobacco, and I'm joined now on set. We let him out of the Frank zone. Frank Morano joins me on set, and Frankie, welcome back.
It's great to be back.
How do you like your new spot over there? Oh boy,
I like it.
You're really lit hot right now.
I see that. Wow,
that
looks like my
hot.
face is on fire.
We may have to adjust that light there, but we're also joined today by Michael Tracey. He's an independent journalist. Tends to lean a little more left than some on this show, but always here for a good, thoughtful discussion, and sometimes even agrees with the other side. Hey, Mike, thanks for joining us.
Hey, good to be with you again.
So, Mike, Frankie and I have been locking horns a little bit here about the attack on the number 2 man in Iran. I think it's a great retaliatory way for Trump to show that there's not going to be lines in the sand that can be crossed anymore. I think it projects some strength. What do you think about this, some say assassination?
Well, I think it's incontrovertibly an assassination. I think if anybody who was remotely analogous to Soleimani was assassinated in the U.S. context, we would immediately declare it as such and also view it as an act of war. And it was an act of war. So is it a demonstration of strength on Trump's part? I guess it depends on how you define strength, but I think the strength that many Trump supporters were looking for when they voted for him was a strength that says we don't need to be interminably engaged in the domestic affairs of the Middle East, and what he's just done is essentially launch a new war in the Middle East. Now, a war doesn't have to immediately entail a full-scale ground invasion. That doesn't seem to be on the cards right now, although we're closer to that than at any point since 2003, and the situation is very dangerous. You have Trump threatening on Twitter to bomb ancient Iranian cultural sites that have been worshipped not just by Muslims in the country, but potentially by Jews and Christians in the country for, again, thousands of years.
I don't think he said any of that.
Yes, he did. He did. He absolutely did. He threatened to destroy, but through aerial bombardment, Iranian cultural sites. And if you go and look at,
some of their most important sites, is what he said.
He said cultural sites in the tweet, right. And then he reiterated it later on in person.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's what he threatened.
Like he's gonna. Okay, all right, I hear you. I understand where you're coming from, Mike. Fair enough. So I don't know, Frankie. You're with Mike on this one.
Yeah,
I think it's
and
good.
You know what? I actually am. And look, I voted for Donald Trump, and I don't think Michael did in 2016. But with the exception of Rand Paul, Tucker Carlson, the American Conservative, and a few other people, I am a little surprised at the deafening silence from so many Trump supporters about what happened here. But Michael, just to play devil's advocate. A lot of people are saying that General Soleimani was a bad guy. Everyone sort of acknowledges that. But Mike Pompeo and the president indicated that this was being done to prevent further attacks on Americans. Based on your research and your reporting, do you see any evidence that that's the case?
Well, I mean, if the experience of Russiagate and the subsequent impeachment debacle tells us anything, it should be that before accepting at face value claims being propagated by the national security state apparatus, we should demand independent verification of evidence. And that's the same mindset that I'm applying to the Iranian crisis that I believe was a totally manufactured crisis that did not need to happen and has now brought us to the brink of full-scale war. They claim that there was some imminent threat that needed to be thwarted by launching this assassination. But when Mike Pompeo has been pressed to elaborate on that point, he kind of just pivots and essentially says that what the administration wants to do ultimately is force regime change in Iran, and the extent of the quagmire that would draw the U.S. into is almost beyond comprehension. Now, I think that I'm kind of pseudo-patriotism mode right now, and it's ironic for me because when I refuted many aspects of the Russiagate and impeachment melodrama, it was from a standpoint of basically dissecting what I thought to be militaristic, self-serving propaganda that was done to undermine Trump. But now that militaristic, self-serving propaganda is being promoted in order to advantage Trump, those very same people who cheered me when I applied these same principles during Russiagate,
they hate you now.
they banished me from their little...
Same here. Same here.
I know the feeling.
Where you stand depends on where you sit, I suppose. Finally, from me, Michael, let me ask you about this tweet that Mike Pence put out the other day on January 3rd. He was listing all of General Soleimani's crimes, and he said that Soleimani assisted in the clandestine travel to Afghanistan of 10 of the 12 terrorists who carried out the September 11th terrorist attacks in the United States. Now, first of all, when I read the tweet, I thought, what happened to the other 7 hijackers? Did we just reduce the amount of hijackers from 19 to 12? And my real question, though, is there any evidence
in the 9/11 Commission report, which I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, was published in 2004, and there's no evidence that Soleimani was personally involved in that. So my question would just be, if we've known this since 2004, then why didn't George W. Bush or Barack Obama or Donald Trump up until a few days ago take action to retaliate against those who facilitated 9/11? It just gives, again, the lie to this notion that there was an imminent threat that was thwarted if they're citing all these roundabout justifications that would also support the legitimacy of this strike. I mean, they're kind of throwing everything at the wall and hoping something sticks.
Mike, is it fair to say their number one general was in the theater, right? Because we're all in agreement that the guy he was riding in the car with is pictured at the embassy leading some of these proxy protesters. Now he's trying to get out of a blatant attack on a U.S. embassy, which is sovereign U.S. soil, and we have one dead American already. Isn't he fair game in the game of war?
Well, not fair game according to the Iraqi prime minister and the Iraqi parliament, which view this as a violation of their sovereignty. And effectively now what the U.S. has done is it's transformed back into an occupying force in Iraq because it's violated the terms of the agreement that was initiated in 2014 when we went back into Iraq for the second or third or fourth time, I'm losing count, in order to combat ISIS. So theater of war, again, not according to the people who actually have territorial jurisdiction over the theater of war. They view this as an infringement on their sovereignty, just as the Iranians view this as an infringement. So what we've now done is essentially unite disparate forces in Iraq and Iran, which ordinarily would have a lot of problems with one another, against the United States. And you have people chanting for retaliation and vowing to take revenge, and I'm assuming that they probably will. There are millions of people in the streets now in Iran who want vengeance, and if their government doesn't respond, they're going to be quite upset. So we're now being sucked further and further into this cycle of retribution, which again has brought us to the brink of war in a more serious way than at any point since 2003. And I thought that's what Trump campaigned against in 2003, in 2016.
You're right on that.
You filled his administration with neocons and Bush supporters.
We're all in agreement on something.
Michael, before
finally.
we run out of time, I have to get your take on the presidential race, specifically the Democratic nomination contest. Some polls came out showing Bernie Sanders leading in New Hampshire and Iowa. Some national polls came out showing Mike Bloomberg jumping to a tie for third place. From where you sit and from where you've been covering it, how do you see the nomination contest playing out from here?
So I've been in New Hampshire since the 29th, and I've mostly been covering Tulsi Gabbard because she doesn't get the type of coverage that I would say is mostly fair and rational. So I've been trying to fill a void in that respect. I think what you have that I'm hearing a lot is that Democratic voters are not entirely decided yet. They're going to wait till essentially the last minute because what they're prioritizing largely is who can defeat Trump, and that gets into electability concerns rather than policy concerns. And so you have a lot of variability in the race, and I don't think we'll have a clear picture of who actually emerges from Iowa until literally the week or so before. I mean, the poll that showed Bernie Sanders ahead in Iowa, for instance, had an effectively in a 3 or even 4-way tie. And so that's well within the margin of error. I mean, there are so many different scenarios that could play out. You could have a different candidate potentially winning each of the 4 first primary states, or you could have one candidate running the table. So there's a lot of uncertainty as to how it's going to transpire. And as far as Mike Bloomberg, I would hope he would at least get some return on the many, many millions of dollars he's spending flooding the country with ads, or else that would be one of the most embarrassing, wasteful expenditures of all time.
All right. Mike Tracey, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to check back in with you again up there in New Hampshire. Thanks for joining us today on Liquid Lunch. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with Jen Kearns and Josh Kravitz. It's the K&K Monday, and they're going to mix it up. I'm going to mix it up, maybe my first drink of 2020 on Liquid Lunch. And thoughtful conversation will be had by all when we return for the Purple People's favorite segment, Mix It Up, right after this.